Good morning and welcome to the classes of costing and taxation. This is your accountancy, sir, and I hope you all are understanding the classes. All five, six of you who watch my videos, the videos that I prepare with so much effort and dedication. Anyways, I'm happy that even six or five students are watching. I try to educate as much as I can. So we were doing income from house property, and I told you that the last class will be the last class for the category 1, and today we'll be starting the category 2, which is property partly let out and partly vacant. So what happens in this case, partly let out, partly vacant, is that it's a simple case. It's quite simple that suppose there is an owner of the house property, and he wants to give the house property to rent only for 6 months. Right? He A tenant comes to him and he says that I want to rent. I want this house property on rent, but the owner says that I'll be able to give you the house property only for 6 months. Why? Because of my personal reasons. After 6 months, I'll stay here, or my relatives will stay here. I'll be able to give you the property on rent only for 6 months. So the rest of the 6 months, the property will be deemed to be vacant, right? The after the next 6 months, the property no it will be deemed that the property is vacant. Nobody is staying on the property. Vacant means empty. Vacant means empty. It means that no one is staying on the property. Although the owner or his relative or his guests might stay in the house property, but in the eyes of law, the house property will be deemed to be vacant or empty. So in that case, what is to be done? Because the all these expected rent and all, they are calculated on an annual basis. And what will happen if the rent is not in annual basis but in monthly basis? For example, the house property is given on rent at 10 months, and 2 months it is vacant. So what is to be done then? This might be a bit complicated, so I suggest all of you who are, of course, 5 6 people who are watching this video, to open your mind and hearts to understand this, because this can get complicated for even good students. Okay, so this is a theory you can copy, but I'm sure you won't be able to understand anything from this theory. But you definitely can keep it for future reference. So, what happens in the normal case? We compare expected rent and the actual rent received. Right, in the last class, I had told you that. In the last class we had to solve the problem of unrealized rent, and we came to the conclusion that whichever is higher of expected rent and actual rent received will be my gross annual value. But what will happen in the case of vacancy? Vacancy, understand this from the point of view of the government. The government says that suppose there is no vacancy, right? So the government says that according to me, there is a property in XYZ place. Its expected rent comes to 90,000, and you are saying that you have given the property on rent for only 80,000 annually. The SSC says, yes, sir, I have given it on less rent. So the government says, it's not my mistake you have given it on less rent. You have to pay me the full tax on expected rent. You have to pay me tax on the amount of 90,000 and not 80,000. The CC says, okay. So this was the normal rule, right? So what happens? We see that is the SSC trying to fool the government or not. Each and every word is important. Okay, please hear me carefully. We see that is the SSC, is he trying to fool the government? So if the actual rent is less than the expected rent, then yes, The SSE is trying to fool the government. But suppose if what happens if expected rent is 90,000 again and actual rent is 95,000 and the SSE mentions it on his report. So the government says that he is an honest SSE, he is an honest person. Then the government will not say that okay, you are honest, then I will take the lower one. No, a law is law. It's same for everyone. Then 95,000 will be my gross annual value. Now suppose what happens now because of vacancy my expected rent, I'm sorry, because of vacancy what happens, I my expected rent was 90,000, my annual rent was 95,000, annual rent, okay, not actual rent, annual rent was 95,000, and because of vacancy what happened, I suffered a loss of 10,000, loss of 10,000. So now my actual rent received is 85,000. Right. Now what we do? Now what do we have to do? Now forget this one. This one is gone. 80,000 is gone. So now my expected rent is 90,000. My annual rent is 95,000. 95,000 is my annual rent. Okay, not actual, please. It's annual rent. And because of my vacancy, okay, this is not unrealized rent. Okay, this is not unrealized rent. This is vacancy. This is the loss which I suffered because of vacancy. I suffered a loss of rupees 10,000 because of vacancy, and now my actual rent is 85,000. Actual rent. Now, if the tax authority or the tax officer sees your report, he sees that did he try to fool me? What will he see that is was his annual rent less than expected rent? If his annual rent was less than expected rent, then definitely the SSE is trying to fool me. But then he sees the report carefully and he sees that the expected rent is 90,000 and the annual rent is 95,000. Means it is more. Means that the annual rent is more than the expected rent and the SSE is honest. He is not trying to make me a fool. However, because of vacancy, what happens? His actual rent has been decreased to 85,000, which is less than the expected rent. In that case, what is my GAV? In that case, my GAV will be 85,000. Okay. However, suppose if what happened if my actual rent, if my annual rent, so now my annual rent is 80,000, my expected rent is same, expected rent is 90,000, annual rent is 80,000, and vacancy is 10,000. Now see, is the SSC trying to fool the income tax officer? Yes. How? Because even before the vacancy his annual rent was less than the expected rent. So he is trying to make a fool out of the income tax officer. So the income tax officer says, I don't care what is your actual rent. The says, sir, my actual rent is only 70,000. Why will I pay tax on 90,000? He says, I don't care. Your gross annual value will be 90,000. Okay. If the actual rent was more than expected rent, if the annual rent was more than expected rent before vacancy, then after vacancy this amount will be my gross annual value. So you just have to think that is the SSC trying to fool the officer? How will he fool the officer? In this case he is fooling the officer. In this case his annual rent is already lower than expected rent, so means the higher will be this, we won't consider the vacancy, this higher value will be taken as the gross annual value. However, in this one what happens, the expected rent is 90, annual rent is 95,000. So here the SSA is an honest one, and because of the vacancy what happened, his actual rent was decreased. So 85,000 will be my gross annual value. Let's solve some examples so that you don't have any confusion in this. So in the first example, my expected rent is 100, annual rent is 108. So tell me, is he an honest assessee or is he a dishonest assessee? He is an honest assessee. Why? Because his annual rent is more than expected rent, right? So in this case, we will consider vacancy and we this one. We will consider vacancy and 99 will be my gross annual value. Okay, 100 was the expected rent and 108 was the annual rent. So he is an honest employee, assessee, because his annual rent was more than expected rent. Therefore, we will consider the vacancy of 99. 108 minus 9, 99. So 99 will be my gross annual value. Let's come to the second example. Expected rent is 100. Annual rent is 48. Ask the question to yourself, is he an honest or a dishonest employee? Assessee. He's a dishonest assessee. Why? Because the expected rent according to government is 100 and his annual rent is how much? Only 48. Is this possible? Why will someone take so less rent from someone? And even if you take less rent, I will take the tax on full amount. So I will not consider this vacancy. This vacancy will not be considered by me. So in this case, my gross annual value will be 100. Okay, my gross annual value will be 100. Now why 100? Because gross annual value is expected rent or rent actually received, whichever is higher. Only in the case of vacancy, you need to ask the question that is he an honest or dishonest assessee. If he is an honest assessee, then consider vacancy. If he is a dishonest assessee like this one, he then consider expected rent as your gross annual value. So here 100 will be my gross annual value. Third example, expected rent is 100 again. Annual rent is 120. Ask the question, honest or dishonest? Honest, because the annual rent is already higher than expected rent, right? So in this case, we'll consider vacancy. But even after considering the vacancy, my actual rent received is only 110, which is still more than expected rent. So what? Whichever is higher, 100 on expected rent or actual rent received, whichever is higher, so 110. Last illustration, and I hope that you understand it. Expected rent is 120, annual rent is 120. Honest or dishonest? In this case both the amount are same, so we'll consider him as an honest employee. Okay, we won't consider him as a dishonest employee, assessee. We'll consider him as an honest assessee, and therefore we'll consider the vacancy. So 120 minus 10 is equal to actual rent received is 110. So 110 will be my gross annual value. I hope that you have understood the following concept. This is the homework for you. Very small but conceptual. This will help you to clear the concept. I'll help you to understand it. So we are given, this is house 1, house 2, house 3, house 4. This is municipal value, fair rent and standard rent of house 1, house 2, house 3, house 4. Don't get confused. This is a vertical sums, not a horizontal sums. Then they have given us annual rent. The annual rent is 72. Acha, if the annual rent is 72, then what is my monthly rent? 72 divided by 12 is equal to 6. 6 is my monthly rent. And here they say vacancy 2 months. Means 12 is my vacancy. Okay. 12 is my vacancy. Annual rent is 72. Now this table should be turned into this format, and then you have to calculate the gross annual value. Okay, again for this sums also I'm telling annual rent 48. 48 divided by 12, 4 is the rent for each month, and they have told vacancy 2 months, so means 4 into 2, 8. Okay, for this also I'm doing 60 is my annual rent. 60 divided by 12, 5. Okay, so 5 is the rent of each month, and I had vacancy for 2 months, so means I lost 2 months of rent, means 5 into 2, 10. Okay, I am leaving the last one for you, only the last one I'm leaving it for you. Calculate the vacancy amount and then calculate the gross annual value. This homework is very important for your concept, and I hope all the students, I mean those 5, 6, 7 students, send the homework to me. Thank you so much for those who are attending my classes. Everyone should have attended the classes, but unfortunately, no worries. I'm very happy for those students who are attending my classes. Thank you.